afternoon's reading of our host, Major Jackson, in celebration of his new collection of poetry, his new and selected Razzle Dazzle, which is 20 years of an arc of poetry, and you can read all of the beautiful copy about it. But that Norton has written out this year, you can buy copies here today, but what I kind of want to say is that I get the pleasure of hearing the back end stories of the life that created this work of poetry. And I've gotten to learn about Major Jackson as a professor and as an educator and as a poet and as a human on this earth, making art and celebrating and exploring art. And it's such a pleasure, and it's such a pleasure to have this book as essentially an artifact of that, and that we get to talk about it today. And also, we have an amazing reader in support of Major, Alexandria Hall, who was one of his students and now is going on to bring art and beautiful poetry out into the world. So we're going to do a little bit of reading. Both Alexandria and Major are going to read, and then we'll have a Q&A with Major about his book and about the Slowdown and how we bring poetry into our daily lives, which is what I get into the nuts and bolts about, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Alexandria Hall. She's from Vermont, and her debut poetry collection, Field Music, on Echo in 2020, was selected by Rosanna Warren as a winner of the National Poetry Series. She holds an MFA from NYU and is now a PhD candidate in literature and creative writing at USC. She's a founder and editor-in-chief of Tele Magazine and co-host of the podcast You Shouldn't Let Poets Lie to You, which I highly recommend you listen to, and we have other co-hosts in the audience. Alexandria lives in LA.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be here tonight in support of Major, and thanks for coming out. The joke. I raised my glass, I laughed, it was a gas, a loss. I left myself sometimes, a lot. The din, the world is loud, one learns to drown it out. The surfacing of little scraps I unforgot. I dully yearned to cease, but only blanked, to lean toward naught and still resound, then down into a sticky dark, a sorry beast, a petty hell. Oh well, a gag, a lark, to that a toast. We're on a roll. How droll. I laughed. I raised my glass. I laughed. And I'm just going to read one more, but it's kind of long. The Wasteland. Days hanging with Joey at the junk shop, among the knickknacks, estranged charging cables, mannequin heads, and half-busted waffle makers. Recording songs above the junk shop, while in the background muted VHS tapes played. Everything piled up, an overflowing palimpsest like Joey's one-off cassettes, recorded on a handheld tape recorder with the erase head removed, so he could layer over, and there was nothing there to erase the old before adding more. All the voices sedimented on a single stretch of magnetic tape, like the long loop in the mind, full of disjecta membra, playing over and over. My mother singing to a Van Morrison tape to comfort me, to never, never wonder why at all. Or doing the voice of the troll in the Billy Goat's gruff, playing again and again, a chorus of children chanting, "Cry baby," on the playground. Again, my name in my love's mouth, Ale. Again, lines of poems picked up like birds on a sweater, speaking themselves on their own, living on in their rhythms as whole and independent units, repeating, back out of all this now too much for us. Yes, out of all this, out into the wash of green and weathered rocks. For years I'd waited to stand up. When I stood, I walked north for days into the rain, walked through fields of sheep and heather, green slopes and heavy lids of mist, into blear and blotting out. And still these heaps of broken images, enough to drown in out there. under the whelming tide at the bottom of the monstrous world, won't you throw me down a lifeline? Heaps of rooms detached from houses, lost melodies, fragments of movies seen from above at the theater where my father worked as a projectionist. Library days, the thick faces of the garbage pail kids, and plastics, endless plastics, life strangled by rings of plastic, bodies permeated by the dust of plastic, whole islands made of unfathomable plastic. Over and over, abundance discarded and preserved in halls and vitrines, flaunting the surprise celebrity of ordinary things, becoming fragments. Do they forget themselves, or do they, remembering, keep their secrets, thinking, I am becoming more in my diminishment, thinking, oh, how I love my beholder. Still, over and over, in their mist and imprecision, images impressed, repeat, persisting like a ruin, maintained in its decay. In the ferry we rocked against the blue-black waves, each wave the body ruins. We stood at the edge. A green-pelted rain could drag a body off this cliff. A body is soft, would be soft against the rocks. Where ruins stand, where moss. When I stood up, I walked for days and won't outlast the ruins. And the loop, crackle of the record, still more things. In ancient childhood, my mother laughing and singing jingles as she toweled me off from my baths. All of it imperfectly recorded and looping like an ambient story, gathered without intention. In myth, the gods have their whole shtick, bestowing and rescinding gifts, making this of that. I like to play my own little god. I make a fool of myself. Isn't it rich? Isn't it queer? I get up on stage and fail to disappear. Or I try to reveal myself in glimpses, but not like the guy who revealed himself to Ashley and me in the alley outside the Radio Bean. Back when she and I were in a band, we'd smoke cigarettes outside the studio, looking out into the empty parking lot, where sometimes night, not just one night in particular, but all night, surged before us like a wave, and it was too tall, or we were too close to it to see its crest, and the whole thing was too immense and too ordinary to mention. We just went about our business. A clock without hands is my kind of thing. You don't see time passing. Gleaned things arranged, revealing, scent and sound, nest material. Rachel made me a spiny fool machine, hunched and bony with oyster shells, a hard and hopeful apparatus. Turns out my inner clown is full of hope, wrote my former teacher in a poem that I love. A machine is a device for the transfer of force. A fool may be instrumental in the transmission of farce. Oh no, oh God no, send in the clowns. In one version of the story, his love dies laughing. Oh no, oh no, I am full of shame. I am a silly goose. I am a monstrous thing, becoming more in my diminishing. Oh, I wish I were an Oscar Mayer wiener. When I tried to forget myself, the world kept knitting past me, and I was a single dropped stitch. Our visit to the city was too brief, but our friends are still there, loving with a gentle and decisive force, cool like running water. Joey played a set in his straw hat. Ashley and I stood side by side, gently swaying. He sang a song I hadn't heard before. There were times I thought I might live like a closed box into which no one, not even I, could see. All is forgiven, sang Joey, and he closed with a cover of Coney Island Baby. Time is not made of parts. It is long and elastic and unbroken. Once, when Misha and I lived at an impossible distance, I took the train to Coney Island to buy him a camera as a gift, the stereoscopic kind like Joey had. I brought my own 35mm with me. It was cold and raining, and I had missed an appointment. I will be good, wrote Bishop in the poem I sent to Rachel. I waited for a man in the parking lot of his apartment complex and paid him in cash, then wandered down to the boardwalk. where the rides and businesses were closed. The beach was gray, nearly as gray as in the pictures I took. Like a circus or a sewer, sang my friend, covering Lou Reed. Awful but cheerful, wrote Bishop. And the boardwalk and the beach with its lone plastic palm tree were empty, which made room for the rest to flow through. Thank you.
Get another round of applause for Alexandria Hall. That was amazing. Major Jackson is the host of 6 books of poetry, as well as several edited volumes and works of prose, a recipient of fellowships from the Academy of American Poets, Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, the John S. Guggenheim Foundation, National Endowment for the Arts, and the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University. Major Jackson has been awarded the Pushcart Prize, a Writers Award, and has been honored by the Pew Fellowship in the Arts and the Witter Bynner Foundation in conjunction with the Library of Congress. Major Jackson lives in Nashville, Tennessee, where he is the Gertrude Conway Vanderbilt Chair in the Humanities at Vanderbilt University. He's an elected member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and serves as the poetry editor of the Harvard Review. He's also the host of the Slowdown. A round of applause and a warm welcome to Major Jackson.
Good evening. What a pleasure to be here, obviously. But what makes it even more special is that I'm reading with someone who walked into my office at age 20, I think, or 21. And very proud that even back then, I was flipping through some old emails, and they were full of, I'm going to be a poet kind of energy, you know. And some of the teachers that are in the room knows that that's a very exciting. It's very exciting to come across someone who does not need to be convinced that poetry is going to be a part of their life, and that poetry is going to save their life. Which brings me to the Slowdown. Let me just say. Myka is one of the great colleagues in my life right now. Someone for whom I can share this passion, and someone who kind of helps me kind of craft a conversation around that work, so that we can build the tribe, build the community. In a way, we've been doing this all along in our private lives, in that we kind of come across a poem and share it with someone, send it to them in an email, maybe post it on the refrigerator in your home. So we just have a bigger platform, and I'm so proud to be working with you and under the auspices of American Public Media, who's co-sponsoring, but also I heard this is an independent bookstore. Is that right? Right? Skylight Books. So can we give them? The great thing about reading at a bookstore, I don't have to carry this thing in my luggage. So I'm just letting you know, I'm going to return it. I'm not going to.
I think you have to sign that one for whoever.
Oh, that's a good point.
And like, you should write, like, I read off this one.
Oh.
Thank you.
Let's see here. I apologize for my voice. I've been reading quite a bit, but also reading poems out loud as I kind of prepare to write some things. So let me begin, not with the poem, let me begin again, but this is a poem called On Listening. If you could listen to my thumbs, then you'd hear the history of oranges. And if you borrowed your neighbor's corkscrew, you'd hear all her sorrows. And if you rode your tourist bicycle northwest along Rue de Lyon, arriving at Place de la Bastille, you'd hear 3 centuries of curses, the Jacobins testing their aging throats. And perchance your eyes widened by love took in the whole sea that is your beloved's mind. You'd brush and shake the sands out of her hair, collect them in your lap, then jar the beige grounds so you could study their infinite light. You need not enact silence or testify with a tongue like a yoke with no fire beneath it. Just let the little grains of your voice blossom like a crest of pine tops, then eavesdrop on your blood, flowing over sinew and marrow. The sound we dress for. We heard salvation breaking over the highways. We cared little of moderation. We walked into bars and clubs like matadors and never believed the songs would go out of us. We pictured the night sky's slow march. Orpheus gave us courage, especially in Brazil. Enraged at cages, endless speeches of rain carved us. Seeing the word award, we thought awkward. We understood the surrealists. Pencils rained in our dreams like prologues. We were a gift for the believers. We erupted appropriately at concerts and readings, and like the Cherico, we clapped for the mannequins' takeover. Their balance, hugs, and flight. I said to myself, someday I am going to get over all this singing. I will no longer follow this reedy band of defiance. Someday I will sculpt myself out of stone. I will get past all this singing. You know what's funny about that? That last line, I read too early. That's what happens when you don't memorize your poems and you look away. But I think it worked. You know, the little impromptu editing. So, what is interesting about going over your work over some years and trying to decide what to include, for me, involved reading the poems out loud. That was part of it. Listening for what particular, not so much what meaning resonates today, although that is one of the criteria. But the other is passing it on to new friends, peers, and even mentors to kind of read through your work and help identify what is still, you know, because when we write, we're so kind of in love with our work. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you need that distance, and sometimes you need someone to say, save yourself. So Liz Johnson, who's here, was one of my readers, one of 3 readers, as was someone else in your community, Ariana, who's also kind of a student in a way. Anyway, so thank you, Ariana, by way of my friend Noah, and thank you, Liz Johnson, for helping this book come into being. The other person is a mystery reader. You can pay him as a fee, and he will help edit. But we bartered. I gave him honey from Vermont, and it worked. Maple syrup, too. This is from a sequence poem that I've been writing for 25 years, and someday I'll finish it, but right now, this is number 52. Over and over again, I bring the peach to my mouth. Over and over again, I bring the peach to my mouth, the peach of thunder, the peach of bare necessities, the peach of starry constellation, a singular path of desire along my brainstem, the peach of my enemies whose slights fly over like poison air, dark as an ink blotter, or like honking geese whose blaring still I welcome. Look at my cheekbones, wet and sticky with the juice of living. What arrives as a riddle to others as cloudy mornings is merely the conundrum I enter like a raft going downstream over rough waters. I like going in, even against the odds. I swim in pond scum. I go to the bank like a pauper and meditate on my future between an alabaster column. I want no handouts. My pulpy tenacity perfumes the air. The peach I sink my teeth into, solemn as the priest of time, another Lazarus forsaking his tomb. I paused because I was so in love with pentameter. Did you hear the pentameter? Thank you. It's like you're literary, right? They don't teach pentameter anymore? Get your money back. I hope they do. Okay. I'm only reading new poems. Not that the old poems are not worth reading, but for the sake of time, here is a poem. Does anyone know how to pronounce this word? I say anacolathon, but you may say anacoluthon. ANACOLUTHON. Anyone? It's a rhetorical term. What if the wasteland is in us after all? Our spreadsheets casting shadows that amount to a defamation of the woodchuck. What if we held an Olympics based on altruism, where the clearest conscience of greed wins? What if all the painted nudes suddenly vanished from their frames in all the museums throughout the world? What if the Holothurian was the most convincing aftermath of alien invasion? What if essays were required in order to obtain a driving license? What if a volume of poems were required in order to run for presidency? What if when we died, all of our secrets were handed as a printout to our grieving families? What if when we died, all of our secrets were handed out to our families? What if our ego was an expression of an inverse correlation to our sense of justice? What if instead of food, we ate musical notes and plot arcs? What if our tears were collected over a lifetime, then frozen and served in sympathy cocktails? What if Heraclitus's river is made of recycled water? What if the Lord our God decided to bring back the practice of smiting, as in immediately the angel of the Lord smote him because he gave not the people the glory, and thus he was eaten of worms? I wrote that in 2016. Making things. Suddenly, I had to skewer all my prayers and slow roast them in the open-air kitchen of my imagination. I had to shovel fire into my laughter and keep my eyes from blinking. I had to fuss like a cook simmering storms. I had to move like a ballet dancer, but without the vanity and self-consciousness of tradition. I had to blur my scars so I could write into time and carry the sensation of walking like a morose and heavy American across Pont Saint-Michel. I want to be all razzle dazzle before the dark cloaked one arrives for a last game of chess. My font of feelings is a waterfall, and I live as if no toupees exist on earth, or masks that silence the oppressed, or anything that does not applaud the sycamore's tribute to the red flame like the heat beneath my grandmother's heart, who never raised the ghost, but a storm. So look at me standing on the porch, threatening to become a raging river. I am going to read something old. You reader, so often I dream of the secrets of satellites, and so often I want the moose to step from the shadows and reveal his transgressions, and so often I come to her body as though she were Lookout Mountain. But give me a farmer's market to park my martyred mass, and I will name all the dirt roads that dead end at the cubist sculpture called my infinity. For I no longer light bonfires in the city of adulterers, and no longer smudge the cheeks of debutantes hurriedly floating across the high fruit of night. And yes, I know there is only one notable death in any small town, and that is the pig farmer. But listen, at all times, the proud rivers mourn my absence, especially when, like a full moon, you, reader, hidden behind a spray of night blooming, drift in and out of scattered clouds, above lighthouses, producing their artificial charms, just to sweep a chalk of light over distant waters. The flaneur tends a well-like summer cocktail. The flaneur tends a well-like summer cocktail. Curbside, on an arc-like table. He's alone, of course, in the arts district, as it were, legs folded, swaying a foot so that his body seems to summon some deep immensity from all that surrounds. Dust shadows inching near a late 30-ish couple debating the post-galactic abyss of sex with strangers. Tourists ambling by, only to disappear into the street's gloomy mouth. A young Italian woman bending to retrieve a dropped Metro card, its black magnetic strip facing up. A lone speckled brown pigeon breaking from a flock of rock doves, then landing near a crushed fast food wrapper newly tossed by a bike messenger. The man chortling after a sip of flaxen-colored beer, remembering that in the Gospel of John, the body and glory converge, linked to incarnation, and so perhaps we manifest each other. A tiny shower of sparks erupting from the knife sharpener's truck, who daily leans a blade into stone. A cloudscape reflected in the rear windshield of a halted taxi, where inside a trans woman applies auburn lipstick. The warlike insignia on the lapel jacket of a white gloved doorman who, opening a glass door, gets a whiff of a dowager's thick perfume and recalls bailing Timothy Hay as a boy in Albania. The woman, distractedly watching a mother discuss Robert Cole Scott's lurid appropriations of modernist art over Niçoise salad, suddenly frees her left breast from its cup where awaits the blossoming mouth of an infant wildly reaching for a galaxy of milk. The sharp coughs of a student carrying a yoga mat. The day's last light edging high-rises on the west side so that they seem rimmed by fire. Just when the man says, and yet amidst the wages we pay, boarding the great carousel of flesh. This is the last two poems. Let me begin again. Let me begin again as a quiet thought in the shape of a shell slowly examined by a brown child on a beach at dawn, straining to see their future. Let me begin this time knowing the drumming of my dreams is me inheriting the earth, is morning lighting up the rivers. Let me burn my vanities, old music in the pines, snifters of scotch, a day moon like a signature of night. This time, let me circle the island of my fears only once, and then live like a raging waterfall, and grow a magnificent mustache. Let me not ever be the bird cage or the serrated blade or the empty season. Dear glacier, dear sea of stars, dear leopards disintegrating at the outer limits of our greed, soon we will encounter you only in motivational tweets. Reader, I should have married you sooner. This time, let me not sleep like the prophet who believes he's seen infinity. Let me run at breakneck speeds towards sceneries of doubt. I have no more dress rehearsals to attend. Look closer. I am licking my lips. Here's the finale. There we go. You know what? I'm going to read a Vermont poem. Yes, in honor of. Now the question is, what's the title of that poem? It has to do with, well, in Vermont, we don't call ice cream. Ice cream, she's already laughing. What do we call them? Creamies. And we are addicted to our maple syrup. And we love rusted farm equipment. It's like installation art. And there are cows, and there are swimming holes, and living there pretty much changed my life. Both the people, the politics, and the land. And it is called This is the other thing, you know, it's like this book. Where is it? Even if I had the first word, I could find it. Well, we'll have to edit that out, won't we? Okay. Yep, I don't even see the title anywhere. Well, it was fun to think about our shared space there for a second there, friend. But well, I'll read this. There it is. I knew if I just talked it through. Here we are. My friend grew up in Addison County. It's called Enchanters of Addison County. We were more than gestural, close listening, the scent of manure riding its waft on the leaves off Route 22A. By nightfall, our gaze flecked like loon cries, but no one was up for turnips, nor other roots, not least of which the clergy. Romanticism has its detractors, which is why we lined the road with tea-lit luminaries and fresh-cut lemons. We called it making magic, then stormed the corners and porches of general stores, kissing whenever cars idled at four-way stop signs or sought grade A maple syrup in tin containers with painted scenes of horse-drawn farmers plowing through snow. The silhouetted rusted farm equipment gave us the laid-back heaven we so often wished, and fireflies bequeathed earth stars, such blink and blank and bunka-bunk-bunk. And of course we wondered if we existed, and also too, the cows of the ancient pastures, and the white milk inside our heads, like church spires and ice cream cones. Even after all that cha-cha-cha, we still came out of swimming holes, shivering our hearts out.
Give another round of applause for Major Jackson. The second one. And now I get to ask you all the tough questions. I think that what I realized, and there's no jealousy, but I'm saying that because it clicked for me something that I feel so closely in your poetry that again reminds me of a thing that we argue about, which is your use of the word we, because you use the third person plural a lot in scripts, and I often am trying to edit out of it for various reasons. But in looking at your work as an arc, and then also at the kind of in these specific poems, something I realized is the level of closeness, and I think I want to call it generosity. And there's this level to which your poetry is extremely social, is that even when you're speaking, you often use we in your poems, but you also, when you're using the I, there's a level of closeness that you have to the other characters in the poems, or so often directly to the listener, to the reader. As you read, reader, I wish I had married you sooner. And I guess I want to ask, is that exhausting? To feel so close to your reader, or so close, and even to Vermont, you have the people right next to you.
Right. Well, I wasn't an only child who was desperate for like siblings or communities, but my early work emerged out of a tradition of activism, and speaking on behalf of communities was very kind of intentional, and also kind of bearing witness to some of the challenges that, as Auden said of Yeats, hurt me into poetry. And so I very much am, uber conscious of that, of the tensions of claiming to speak before or have, and you're right, it's not convincing, but in a way,
yes, it is.
Well, for me, it's also kind of corralling and embracing and wanting that we to kind of manifest into something that is going to break down, unfortunately, the kind of social boundaries and constructions that prevent us from embracing and enriching ourselves, But in the kind of writing that we're doing to on-ramp the poems to be heard, I totally am convinced that a stronger position in that space is to write from a very kind of subjective eye. This is my experience for sure. But occasionally I think it's necessary to wrestle readers and listeners into that we, because they don't want to see. They've been trained not to kind of put up these constructions, these walls. So it's a very observant and very observant observation of the work. In the previous book, inspired by Borges's self-reflective you, that felt like a very experimental, inhabiting a voice that is myself. So it's that you that is speaking about the self. That felt really radical for me. Like, I'm normally not someone who would use second person at all.
Yeah. We've had a lot of conversations also about the second person.
Yes.
I was thinking about that today. I mean, this isn't about your work, but when we were talking about Jane Hirschfeld, who uses she a lot, when a lot of more contemporary poets would use the you, would use the second person.
Yeah. The third person, as many of the poets in the room know, is a strategy of putting distance between. You might be writing about the self, and you could say I, but if you say she or he or they, then what you're doing is kind of, doing something a number of poets have done, is like not claiming that space, and to put it, and that can be a psychological barrier for a writer to kind of create that space for them, but it also could be safe. Like that's the only subjectivity they can occupy in order to process some of what's emerging out of the poems as dangerous.
I've heard that in nonfiction writing classes where people use the second person and then just change it all back to first person.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
take every single one and just flip it as a kind of like liberating exercise.
Yeah.
And to switch it back around to talking about podcast writing, I think it's something I find through when it is the person speaking, using the I, it's so intimate, just no music, human voice, that there's a level of authority that comes from that intimacy, that the I is kind of like a trick sometimes.
Yeah.
Because somehow it feels like your internal dialogue, and so then you occupy the speaker in podcasts, which is a little freaky, honestly.
You mean entering, convincing the listener that they are inhabiting that I?
Yes.
Yeah. 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 I mean, how many times have I read either memoir, poetry, watched the film? I think our impulse is to find that character for whom we can attach our own experiences to. We need that reflection. But when that voice is constructing the self, that's where I feel like it gets,
We're getting into it.
gets, yeah, it gets a little kind of murky.
I'm going to talk about something else to do with podcasts, and then I have something part of your book that I want to talk about.
Sure.
So we'll do those two things. So yesterday I was at a podcast event, and a producer, was talking about that they were saying most podcasts cater to the intellectual. And they were talking about then really leaning into sonic experiences that are body feels, and it really put them into two separate camps. And it was something that I just couldn't agree with, because I think that poets so often are creating a sonic experience that is both intellectual and within your body. And I think we very often feature poetry that does that. I think your work does that. And so I actually like turned to someone immediately. I was like, wait, no, like it does both. And we use music to get to that, theme music in the show. But I think even there is a musicality to your poetry and a relishing of language that allows for that, as she put it, body feel. But it still does the intellectual. And I think a really good example of that is your Sun Ra Persona poems from your early work, but I think it carries through in much of your work. Do you also disagree?
No, I totally agree
with this
I would
person, but agree with
say
me?
Body first, hopefully, and that's the music part of it. The music is wanting to kind of get inside. But interesting enough, I've listened to podcasts too, and some of them feel really overproduced on the kind of sonic landscape beneath it. It's almost like they're leaning too heavy on the audio. And that can also happen in poems. You can come across a poet that you like, and they're just so loving their alliteration, and they're so loving their rhyme, and it's just like you feel like it's more of a, in a way of window dressing a home that the value is really low, but they came in and put some nice furniture in, and meanwhile, there's rusted pipes, so y'all get that.
What's the poetic rusted pipe?
The poetic rusted pipe would be whatever is preventing the poet to arrive at a place of reconciliation, a place of seeing, like really identifying why they are at the page. I love poems that do all kinds of gestures. I'm a fan of sparkly stuff, but in the end, what am I really getting? And I feel like sound, excessive use of sound, is really about sensibility and not about substance. Did that sound harsh?
I don't think so.
Good.
I'm going to read a section from one of your poems, which I okayed ahead of time because I don't want to, occupy your voice. But this is from Roll Deep, which is your book from 2015. It's a poem called Reverse Voyage. And I wanted to tap into this poem because I think it occupies a certain place in your arc, and I think it does something about time and aging and growing as an artist and growing as a human, and I think this section stands alone, and I'm going to read it, and I have a little follow-up question. Even here, all's remixed. In Fairmount Park, a posse plays the same din with fresher strains of freedom, what never passes. That is the message, always, of its August lines, a rangy dignity, the lesson, too, of what one refuses to never forget about this place. A grandmother, Mrs. Pearl, a domestic, 30 years boarding SEPTA early mornings. I think of her clutching a tan purse, statelier than these lines. So oblivion vacates memory. These connecting columns of bricks and wires and me, its last deportee, which the blood sings no matter snowcaps, no matter mountainous ranges and glittering lakes like flashing daggers, no matter allegory of hoarfrost, no matter tractor parades and morning finches and blue jays that skitter my sight in a valley far away from city pigeons who hop and settle off electric wires near street gutters to pack heads at one crumb or another, where local inhabitants too study skies with a certainty affixed to rooftops and flashing underbelly of green and red lights going elsewhere or nowhere. You really do write poetry that's fun to read. And in this poem, and what I want to talk about is something that a thought that I had a couple weeks ago, which is aging just waiting for visitation. And is aging, and by visitation I mean waiting for the bird. Something that's been memeified a lot is as you get older, you just start watching birds and you set out the feeder. But I think there's a kind of emotional and literary bird feeder that the poet eventually puts out. And I feel like this section is the emotional literary bird feeder emerges.
Are y'all following this? Pretty much she's saying, as an artist, when you're setting out to be an artist and writing, at the other end is clearly, and I think what you're saying is that so much of what kind of brings us to the page, is beauty, of course. It's whatever.
It's rangy dignity.
It's working. It's all there, but eventually we're going to wind up at a bird feeder. And we're going to be maybe even writing about birds, and writing about, doing drawings of birds.
Morning finches and blue jays that skitter my sight in a valley.
Interestingly enough, yes, I have 3 bird feeders. I haven't written about the birds, but you're right, it's coming. But you mentioned aging, which is very interesting because there is that group of artists for whom the domestication becomes a zapping of their creative powers. And they may even consciously or subconsciously create drama in their life so that they can have material. And I love this, Jack Gilbert in an interview, someone asked him, he traveled, some of you know, he lived in Greece and lived this kind of peripatetic life as a poet, and they thought it was just for his art. And I love that he pushed back really hard and said, I do not find myself in dramatic situations just to make poems. Mm-hmm. There seems something empty about that quest. For me, I think aging into an art in which you go to the page as a discipline, you go to the page to surprise yourself, you go to the page because you want to be in conversation with your peers and with the past and with some future reader. You go to the page when you got into an argument with your beloved. The art is a steady fixture in your life by which the world swirls and everything that you go through swirls. The aging part of that is it becomes even more of a kind of a tuning fork of your growth. Much of it's interesting you read that poem giving the theme here of Vermont. You guys said, we're in Vermont Avenue too, aren't we?
We are. I think by aging I could also mean growing.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And for me, it was the anxieties of growing up in North Philadelphia and in a black community and finding myself suddenly in a non-diverse state like Vermont, being drawn to the natural world and the outdoors, particularly after driving several times cross country and being educated up in Vermont. I knew that this was my sacred space, but I wasn't convinced of it, and so the reverse voyage was starting in that space and going back to Philadelphia. That's the journey of that poem. But you're absolutely right. I mean, in a way, there is a distillation of one's cares and worlds. The challenges that I faced as a young poet, I don't face them now. In fact, I'm so far from that, you know. And my hope is that the book kind of gives you that journey. Marcel Duchamp stopped making art at some point. He wanted to play chess. He wanted to be a master chess player. Picasso stopped doing his cubism. He was drawing circles. There's something quite oddly moving about it, even politics aside, of Picasso. Something quite moving about you as an artist, all that, the fire in you to make, boiling down to a garden, boiling down to a hike, boiling down to feeding birds.
Can I transition into the Q&A by asking you a question that has nothing to do with poetry? I can't remember what it's called, but like, how do you feel about Duchamp's final artwork? Which is in the
It's in
Philadelphia Museum of Art.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything about it. I walked into the exhibit and I was
I'm
like,
so
okay,
sorry.
nude descending a staircase, like, cool. That was really exciting to see in person.
Yeah.
And then like there's the text for his final work of art,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, hell yeah.
Yeah.
I'm gonna see Duchamp's final work of art. And then I walked around the corner.
And you walk
Tell them what's around the corner.
Around the corner. How many of you know this? Okay. You go to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. You'll see the famous urinal, right? And the beautiful thing about that urinal is, here was an artist who took a urinal and put it in a museum, and suddenly it's art. And that radicalizes how we understand art. And then for exhibition in, I want to say 1914, there's the big glass piece that he's transporting. He drops it, there's a big crack that runs through it. All these odalisques in there. And he calls it Bride Stripped Bare by Her Bachelors. And it's perfect. They're like, oh, you can't exhibit. He's like, no, perfect. But then when he retires, supposedly, he was working on this and drawing circles. No, that was because he was working on this piece that is almost like a big diorama. It's a door, wooden door, and you peek in. Everyone has to walk in, so it's in a way interactive. And there is a stream, and there is a landscape that looks like almost like a fairyland. And then there's a woman. It's really, really disturbing. I think even at 12 years old when I discovered it, it's you know, people have written about it. It's a conundrum. That's all I'm gonna call it. It's a conundrum. How did you react?
I have something really embarrassing to say.
I'm all ears.
I didn't know there was a hole.
You just saw the door?
I was like, he just made a door?
Oh.
No, I was like, don't touch the art.
let's
I have to
take
go back
a
to
trip
Philadelphia.
Yeah. You didn't peek through the hole?
No. I didn't know there was a hole.
I mean,
This was not a setup. I had no idea.
that would be cool. A door.
I was like,
You know,
I thought
just
there
a
was. I was
door.
like trying to make you do some trick commentary.
Oh no, it was traumatizing seeing that.
I'm traumatized right now in front of all these people.
I'm Major Jackson, your guide on the pathways to feel and understand our common journey through poetry. Join the Slowdown for a poem and a moment of reflection in one short episode every weekday.